Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural presentation of the 2025-2026 Public Programs Calendar. Some of you may have heard this is the 150th anniversary of the Theosophical Society. It's kind of a big deal, and I thought, in honor of that we would revisit the earliest days of the Theosophical Society. I've always been fascinated by the founders and early Theosophy. For me, experiencing the history of the Theosophical Society has brought me closer to the teachings themselves and made it a lot more relatable. So how did this all start? On September 7th, 1875, a small group gathered for what was sure to be an exciting presentation. The Kabalah of the Egyptians and the Greek Canon of proportion. The normal law of being and of beauty applied to art, sculpture, architecture, symbolism, language, natural law and science, and the deciphering of the hidden meaning of the sculptured and written Egyptian and Hebraic religious records by George Henry Felt. Mr. Felt really knew how to hype his presentations. May have overpromised a little, but it certainly was appealing. The lecture was held in the home of Madame Helena Blavatsky, which had become something of a gathering place for the occult-minded in New York at the time. While living in New York, Madame Blavatsky started publishing some articles and letters on spiritualism, magic, and occultism. According to Colonel Olcott, this and the stories that were afloat about her magical powers and our several affirmations of the existence of non-human races and spiritual beings drew into our acquaintance numbers of bright and clever people of occult learnings. Already her parlors got all these people coming through. Prior to this big talk by George Felt, Colonel Olcott, the other of the primary founders, that he was an agriculturist, very successful agriculturalist, an American military officer, journalist, and lawyer. He held the title of president-founder of the society from 1875 until his death in 1907. During his presidency, he helped to restore Buddhism in South Asia and establish schools for children of Buddhist and Hindu families, among many other notable achievements. In the country of Sri Lanka, he's particularly venerated for his preservation of Buddhism and of their traditional customs. Throughout his career, Colonel Olcott had been interested in spiritualism. And in 1874, he was asked to take a special assignment for the New York Daily Graphic to report the psychic phenomenons at the Eddy Farm in Vermont. It was at Chittenden, Vermont, while he was on assignment, that he met H.P. Blavatsky, who had come there on instructions from her master. Joining forces with her, from this point onward, he worked to carry out the purposes of the Brotherhood of Adepts, especially those purposes related to the specific mission assigned to Madame Blavatsky and her master. They often refer to Olcott and Blavatsky as the Theosophical twins. They were like the yin and yang of the early Theosophical movement, complementing each other and able to do more than either of them could have done independently. Colonel Olcott described what happened after a highly interesting lecture in his book, Old Diary Leaves. An animated discussion followed. In the course of this, the idea occurred to me that it would be a good thing to form a society, to pursue and promote such occult research, and after turning it over in my mind, I wrote on a scrap of paper the following. Would it not be a good thing to form a society for this kind of study? And gave it to Mr. Judge, at the moment standing between me and HPB, to pass over to her. She read it and nodded her assent. Thereupon I rose and, after some remarks, broached the subject. It pleased the company, and when Mr. Felt, replying to a question to that effect, said he would be willing to teach us how to evoke and control the elementals, it was unanimously agreed that the society should be formed. Upon motion of Mr. Judge, I, Olcott, was elected chairman, and upon my motion, Mr. Judge was elected secretary of the meeting. The hour being late, an adjournment was had to the following evening when formal action should be taken. The organization of the society began in the next meeting held on September 8th. On September 13th, in a new meeting at the same address, Mr. Felt gave another lecture. At this time, the name of the Theosophical Society was agreed upon. According to Colonel Olcott, the choice of the name of the newly formed society was subject to discussion in the committee, and several options were suggested, such as the Egyptological, the Hermetic, the Rosicrucian, etc. societies. However, none of them seemed the right one. At last, he calls, in turning over the leaves of the dictionary, one of us came across the word Theosophy. Whereupon, after discussion, we unanimously agreed that this was the best of all. Olcott explained this name was appropriate because it expressed the esoteric truth we wished to reach and cover the ground of methods of occult and scientific research. It does not, upon review, seem likely that the name for the society was chosen merely out of the dictionary search. She had already connected her knowledge with the term Theosophy several months before in a letter to Hiram Corson. They did look at the dictionary. I assume they really did this, so I pulled up. This is Noah Webster's 1865 English Dictionary definition of theosophy. It says, Theosophy, wise in the things of God, supposed intercourse with God and superior spirits, and consequent attainment of superhuman knowledge by physical processes, as by the theurgic operations of some ancient Platonists, or by the chemical process of German fire philosophers. Also a direct knowledge of God as distinguished from a revealed knowledge of God supposed to be attained by extraordinary illumination, especially a direct insight into the processes of the divine mind and the interior relations to the divine nature. Does that seem like what we're doing here? I mean, so I think, so the term theosophy predates the Theosophical Society. The people we're going to talk about tonight are not the first theosophists, right? They are the first modern theosophists. When I say the early theosophical movement in my title, I mean the modern movement. So if this is the definition of theosophy, what's the definition of a theosophist? Well, that's one addicted to theosophy. Who were these pre-TS theosophists? These are some of the historical figures that are frequently considered early theosophists the dictionary entry is likely pointing to. So we have Pythagoras, an ancient Greek philosopher, polymath. His political and religious teachings were well known in ancient Greece and influenced the philosophies of Plato, Aristotle, and through them, Western philosophy. Ammonius Saccas was a Hellenistic Platonist, a self-taught philosopher from Alexandria, generally regarded as the precursor of the Neoplatonists. So here's another of your early theosophists. And then Paracelsus is one of these fire philosophers, a Swiss-German physician, alchemist, and occultist. Paracelsus believed that true knowledge of nature could only be gained through fire. Those are our theosophists that we have in mind going into this. So who were these folks in 1875 who thought they were going to be like Ammonius Saccas and Pythagoras and Paracelsus? So the company included several persons of great learning, some of wide personal influence, the managing editor of 2 religious newspapers, the co-editors of 2 literary magazines, an Oxford LLD, a venerable Jewish scholar, a traveler of repute, an editorial writer of one of the New York morning dailies, the president of the New York Society of Spiritualists, Mr. C.C. Massey, an English visitor, Mrs. Emma Hardinge, Britten, and Dr. Britten, 2 New York lawyers, besides Colonel Olcott, partner in a Philadelphia publishing house, a well-known physician, and most notably of all, Madame Blavatsky herself. This comprised Mr. Felt's audience. So let's start with our presenter, Mr. George Henry Felt. George Felt was a Union Army officer. He was part of the New York Volunteer Regiment. He was an inventor and engineer. He really was a pioneer in signaling technology on the battlefront, where you would send different colored flares up, communicate with other parts of your army about what movements were going on. He claimed to have magical powers, as evidenced by his magnificently titled flyer. Felt claimed to have discovered how Egyptian priests invoked and commanded the spirits of the elementals. He declared he was able to demonstrate this and render them visible. As such, Mr. Felt was elected vice president of the society, but he failed to keep his promise to demonstrate phenomenon. In Colonel Olcott's words, "She never showed us as much as the wag of the tail of the vanishing elemental." Needless to say, the assembled group ended up being fairly disappointed in Mr. Felt. He was voted out as vice president of the society in 1876. After being removed as vice president, Felt drifted out of the society. He was in England in 1877 and proposed the formation of a society of occult research, with himself as the president. Nothing came of this proposal. Felt's New York Times obituary noted that he was a 32nd degree Freemason. So we've met our host, met the presenter. Now we're going to look at the rest of the attendees. These are the other 12 people that were present, and we're going to go over them real quick and see who were these curious aspiring theosophists. So we're going to start with Charles Sotheran. He was elected the librarian of the new organization. He was an antiquarian, a bookseller, and a journalist. His temperament kept him and his friends in turmoil. 3 months after the society was formed, there was trouble, as Sotheran not only made inflammatory speeches at a political street meeting, to which HPB objected, but he wrote bitterly in the newspapers against her and the society. His resignation was accepted. An excerpt from Sotheran's resignation. "I have been much annoyed by inquiries and statements concerning my connections with the Theosophical Society. I wish it to be distinctly understood that I have no longer anything whatsoever to do with that organization. It has been asserted that I have left the Theosophical Society through lack of moral courage. Those who know me well cannot be aware that such a statement is utterly false, and that my real reasons for taking the step are because I am confident the pretensions of the society are fallacious. Further, that the position taken by the president in his inaugural address and the expression of the other members are of such a character as to only render the body ridiculous in the estimation of a thinking person, I would not thus trouble you readers with matters of a personal nature, but I consider it my duty to myself and to my friends to do so, because in consequence of having recently recommended acquaintances and others not to join the society, Madame Blavatsky has in a letter dated the 8th and written on official paper, whether by order of the society or not, is immaterial, threatened me as one who should be and will be proceeded against in such a way as to prevent his attempting to do further harm. Madame Blavatsky may have occult powers and extraordinary character, but after intimate knowledge of her for a considerable period, I can confirm that in my humble opinion, she possesses none whatsoever. Notwithstanding, she may have psychologized herself and her champions into believing so, and therefore her threats fall on me with as little effect as the wind which passeth idly by. I would advise her, instead of abusing those like me, who are struggling to find the highest truth and detest imposture of any kind, to content herself with combating those with whom she has real cause of grievance. He's very upset. 6 months later, Southern apologized and was taken back into membership. He gave useful help to HBB in finding quotations and borrowing books for her during the writing of Isis Unveiled. He eventually became a considerable nuisance to HBB and HSO, and after their departure to India, he was not again mentioned. There you got these characters. All right, next up, we have Dr. Charles Edward Simmons. Dr. Simmons was a member of the University Club, the Manhattan Club, the Delta Psi Fraternity, the New York County and State Medical Societies, and the Greater New York Medical Association, the St. Nicholas Society, and the New England Society. Dr. Simmons' brother was made the president of the New York Stock Exchange just 2 years after the meeting. Not much more is known of Dr. Simmons, other than he practiced in Troy, New York, but he does seem to be a serial joiner, if you ask me. I don't know how he found time to do anything with all of his memberships. Next, we have Herbert H.D. Monachesi. He was a librarian and editor, including the Stationer's Handbook for Practical Business. This was chiefly intended for use for retail stationers and booksellers, printed in 1876. But by 1882, he was an officer and ship's rider on a U.S. warship protecting U.S. interests off the coast of West Africa. By 1900, at the age of 51, he was laying to rest back in New York City. That's all we know about Mr. Monachesi. The next one's pretty interesting. You could spend a lot of time researching Emma Hardinge Britten, because she was one of the preeminent spiritualists in America at the time. A well-published author, very prominent. She had been before the public eye for 40 years as a spiritualistic medium, an inspirational lecturer, and author. Some of the early meetings of the Theosophical Society were held in her house. Her presence was considered necessary for the formation of the society. Just about the time Isis Unveiled was appearing, she was advertising a book called Art Magic. Now, she tried to push Art Magic as the first theosophical manual, and you'll see places refer to that. Madame Blavatsky and Henry Seal Olcott did not agree that this was the first theosophical manual, but Art Magic is out there if you're curious. In her 1884 book, 19th Century Miracles, she gives one of the only extant first-hand accounts of the original September 7th meeting. She says, "The title of the Theosophical Society explains the objects and desires of its founders. They seek to obtain knowledge of the nature and attributes of the supreme power and of higher spirits with the aid of physical processes. In other words, they hope that by going deeper than modern science has hitherto done into the esoteric philosophies of ancient times, they may be enabled to obtain for themselves and other investigators proof of the existence of an unseen universe, the nature of its inhabitants, if such there be, and the laws by which govern themselves with their relations to mankind." So this is not very far off from what we see in Theosophy today. Whatever may be the private opinions of its members, the society has no dogmas to enforce, no creed to disseminate. It is formed neither as a spiritualistic schism, nor to serve as the foe or friend of any sectarian or philosophic body. Its only axiom is the omnipotence of truth. It is only creed a profession of unqualified devotion to its discovery and propagation. Our little gathering has had to contend with all those obstacles which ordinarily hang upon the footprint of new movement. We have been misrepresented in many quarters, not accepting those from whom we had the most right to expect sympathy and support. We have been sneered at as attempting to revive the superstitions of the Dark Ages and roll back the car of progress. Our society has been denounced as antagonistic to truth and progress because we are aiming to discover the clue to ancient sciences as a basis for modern improvements. Hence, we had trials to encounter, compelling us to, at last, to shield the truths we could not endure to see misrepresented, by making our organization, if not actually a secret society in its fullest sense, at least an exclusive one, reserving all knowledge of our deliberations and proceedings to our own members, except where we decided amongst ourselves to give them publicly, like in a public presentation or something. She continued to work as a medium to publish and push her galvanic medicine practice. And her husband, Dr. William Britten, came up with some really interesting early electrical devices where they were using electrical stimulation to try and elicit responses from the body. It sounds a little bit kooky, but then again, I see that kind of stuff at the hospital all the time these days, so I don't know how kooky it really is. He too was a spiritualist and published with her 19th century mirror. The division between EHB, Emma Hardinge Britten, and HBB regarding the role of elemental beings during seances proved too much to overcome. Her relationship with the TS was affecting her practice as a spiritualist. Controversy followed EHB, with debunkers following her across the globe to Australia and New Zealand. Next, we have David E. de Lara. This is our well-traveled lecturer. In June 1873, he wrote a 15-part series on defense of our national system of education against the attacks of the Catholic press. A vigorous attack on admitting religion, especially Catholicism, into public schools, while learned historical digressions on the evil consequences of the Catholic political thought. At the conclusion of this diatribe, he took up the cudgels against Freemasonry, Judaism, and Christianity. So this is all before the meeting. He's already done all this stuff. Mr. David de Lara must have been quite old, since he mentions a book he had seen in Spain in 1820. That year, he gave a series of talks. One, the social, moral, and political conditions of Russia. The advertisement said that he had recently returned from St. Petersburg after a residence of 2 years. Of course, not all of his lectures were on serious subjects. In 1875, he also gave a satirical humorous talk called Nature and Art, or Love and Marriage, at the synagogue on Lexington Avenue in New York. He was delivering it for the third time by special request. Next, we have W.L. Alden, and he was also already famous at the time. He was an editorial writer in the New York Times. Of great repute for his caustic and humorous criticism of current topics. He did not seem to last very long as a member, and in 1881, he said he had been dragged into the society and cared nothing for it, and in one article referred to the founders as deadheads. Alden was appointed consul general in Rome, Italy by President Grover Cleveland in 1885, a position he held in 1889, and received from the king the Cross of Chevalier of the Order of the Crown of Italy. Alden, while not a fan of the TS, goes on to become an Italian knight. That's pretty cool. Next we have C.C. Massey. Charles Carlton Massey was an English barrister, keenly interested in spiritualism. He became the founder and first president of the British Theosophical Society. It was the first branch outside of the United States. He was also one of the founders of the Society for Psychical Research in 1882. He was one of the ablest metaphysicians in Great Britain and a lucid and scholarly writer on psychical subjects. He is mentioned 20 times in the Mahatma letters. Sir Massey also resigned from the society. He says, "I have only to add that while preserving all the interests and much of the belief which attracted me to the Theosophical Society and which have kept me in it up to now, notwithstanding many and growing embarrassments, I do not think that the publication of the conclusions above expressed is consistent with loyal fellowship. The constitution, no doubt, of the Society is broad enough to include minds more skeptical than my own in regard to the alleged sources of its vitality and influence. But let anyone try to realize this nominal freedom, and he will find himself not only an uncongenial element, but in an attitude of controversy with his ostensible leaders, with the motive forces of the society. That is not consistent with the sympathetic subordination or cooperation which is essential to union. If anything could keep me in position of embarrassment or insincere, it would be the noble life and character of the President, my friend, Colonel Olcott. But personal considerations must give way at length, and accordingly, unabated regard and my respect for many for whom it is painful to separate, I am forwarding my resignation of fellowship to the proper quarters." This was a result of the Kittle affair, A.P. Sinnott, in one of his books, published a letter that had an excerpt from a speech a Reverend Kittle had given earlier in that year. When he read A.P. Sinnott's book, he was very upset to see that it was taken nearly word for word from the speech he had given. When it was explained in the newspaper what had happened, Mr. Massey felt that explanation was a little too difficult for him to believe. He couldn't suspend his disbelief. Mr. Massey just could not do that, and when he felt like he had to say something, it was in resignation to it. Our next venerable potential theosophist, Henry J. Newton. After completing his schooling and an apprenticeship in Connecticut, Newton went to New York and continued in the piano trade. In 1858, at the age 35, he retired and invested so judiciously in New York real estate that he died a millionaire. A scientific interest in spirit photography led Newton to the study of spiritualism. He exposed a number of fraudulent mediums, including the famous Etta Roberts, by apparatus and tests which he originated. His faith in the truths of spiritualism remained unshaken, however, and for the last 20 years of his life, he is president of the First Society of Spiritualists in New York. Newton was a man of dauntless moral courage. Tenacious of opinions, he was elected treasurer of the Theosophical Society, but withdrew when he found neither HPB nor Felt were going to show him any adepts or elementals. He was very disappointed that Felt did not deliver. He retained the record list of the society, which he later refused to give up, regarding it as a valuable relic, and was rather inclined to the opinion that he himself had formed the Theosophical Society. In 1895, Newton was run over and killed by a streetcar during an evening rush hour as he crossed Broadway between 22nd and 23rd Streets. This was then the most dangerous spot in New York. This is the site of the Flatiron Building, which had not been built just yet. John Storer Cobb. He served as the first recording secretary from October 30th, 1875 to 1877, and then as treasurer from 77 to 79. Henry Steele Olcott wrote that Cobb was involved in the formation of the British Theosophical Society in London, later called the London Lodge. After this work, Cobb's relationship with Colonel Olcott and HPB declined. On his return at the end of August 1878, he stayed with Colonel Olcott and HPB for almost a month before leaving. A departure that, as Colonel Olcott says, left the house peaceful and happy. This sojourn seems to have marred his relationship with HPB, and after her departure to India, Cobb's name is heard nevermore. J. Hyslop, thought, though not otherwise identified, is thought by some to have been James H. Hyslop, who during his lifetime rose to prominence and was chief founder and head of the Independent American SPR in 1875. He was a 21-year-old college student in Ohio at the time. So I don't know if he came for this or if this is the same guy, but they think it's this guy. Next to him, we have H.M. Stevens. Stevens was appointed along with Henry J. Newton and Charles Sutherland to a committee instructed to draft the Constitution and bylaws of the organization. Nothing else is known of Mr. Stevens. The wiki is pretty quiet about this. I looked around, and at least the AI thinks that he's Harry Moseley Stevens. He was born in 1855, so he would have been 20 years old. He did establish himself in Niles, Ohio. And again, there was other young people that came from Ohio for the meeting. But if it was him, Harry Moseley Stevens was a food concessionaire from England, credited with being America's foremost ballpark concessionaire. Various sources credit him with being the inventor of the hot dog. The story being, he was at a baseball game. They were trying to sell cold drinks and nobody wanted to buy it because it was so cold out. So they started selling sausages to the ballpark goers at the time, but he couldn't spell dachshund. And so he called them hot dogs. That is, I'm not sure this is related to Theosophy at all, but maybe. One of these formers, though, was a little bit mysterious, and he's not listed in many places. And that is Dr. Seth Pancoast. Now, on the original document, when the recorder took down the names of all the people, Dr. Pancoast does not appear here. Although in old diary leaves, Colonel Olcott says he was at that first meeting on September 7th. So why is his name not present when it says all those to submit their names? Why didn't Dr. Seth Pancoast submit his name? The reason was that night he questioned George Felt quite vociferously that September 7th night. Apparently he was the one that really gave the grilling about whether or not he was going to see these elementals and whether or not George Felt could do magic. And he was always a little suspicious of Felt. And my supposition is, because later on he becomes co-vice president with Felt, but that first night, based on what I said, I think he was just suspicious of what was there, wasn't willing to step forward. Dr. Seth Pancoast of Philadelphia was a professor of medicine, a mystic, and an occultist. He was a descendant of a Quaker family that accompanied William Penn in establishing the colony of Pennsylvania. He was married 3 times. His middle son, Henry Coenrath Pancoast, must have been named as tribute to the great German alchemist Heinrich Coenrath. Henry followed his father into medical practice and became a pioneer in the field of radiology. Dr. Pancoast's personal library was described as the finest private collection of works on the occult sciences in the United States. It is clear from Pancoast's literary references that he was familiar with Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and the German language. He wrote medical books and articles, including one on the therapeutic qualities of the light spectrum. Might have seemed kooky at the time, but there's been a lot of work on that as well. Colonel Olcott described Dr. Pancoast as a most erudite Kabbalist. In 1877, he published the Kabalah, the True Science of Light, an introduction to the philosophy and theosophy of the ancient sages. Dr. Pancoast remained a member until his death in 1889. That group of people are the people that Olcott would have referred to as the formers. And again, they were there at the very beginning meeting, but he has a good reason why he doesn't consider all of these folks the founders. He says, the society then had 16 formers. To use the most apposite term, not founders. For the stable founding was a result of hard work and self-sacrifice of years, and during a part of that time, HBB and I worked quite alone in the trenches, laying the strong foundation. Our colleagues either went out entirely or became listless or were prevented by force of circumstance from devoting their time and efforts to the work. So as you can see, like, all these people are there, and it was important that they were there, but they didn't all stick around for much after that. Those were our formers. So now, again, on that November 17th, this is the real foundation. The Theosophical Society was formed in a series of 6 meetings that took place from September 7th until November 17th. The official day of founding of the Theosophical Society is November 17th, 1875, and is celebrated by members as Foundation Day. 3 members of that original company are today considered to be the founders of the Theosophical Society. Blavatsky, Olcott, and, which everybody knows,
better be
Elbridge Jerry Brown. What? This story is one less familiar in theosophical circles. But I thought it was both fascinating and instructive. Initially, the third founder was to be a 26-year-old publisher of a weekly journal devoted to science, history, philosophy, and the teachings of spiritualism. The paper was seen as an ideal mouthpiece for the dissemination of the work of a coming true spiritualist movement. Unfortunately, despite several discussions and entreaties by Blavatsky and Olcott, Brown remained unconvinced that his destiny lay with this pair of ambitious occultists. Blavatsky says, "Several $100s out of our pockets were spent on behalf of the editor, and he was made to pass through a minor diksha, or initiation, this proving to no avail. The Theosophical Society was established anyway. The man might have become a power, all caps. He preferred to remain an ass, all caps. De gustibus non disputandum est," which means, in matters of taste, there can be no disputes. So she and Mr. Brown did not share the same taste. Now, of course, Mr. Brown has his own side of the story to all this, so I'll briefly touch on that. In an 1889 interview he gave, he recounts it this way. Colonel Olcott and Madame Blavatsky offered to support his paper if he published their articles promoting occultism, and they did publish. Many of her early articles are found in his paper. He agreed with minor reservations, and for a period, the scientists served as their platform to reach the American spiritualist community. However, this did not satisfy Madame. She wanted control of both the paper and Brown himself, seeking his full submission. Brown resisted, resulting in confrontations where she used strong language and threats. Despite several meetings involving promises and intimidation, with Olcott also participating, Brown refused her demands, but tried to avoid a public conflict due to the journal's reliance on their support. This was the state of affairs when he became engaged to marry his present wife. The madam learned of his engagement and confronted him in his office, and angrily asked if he planned to marry. When he said yes, She forbade it, insulted him, and threatened him with severe consequences if he didn't retract his promises immediately. After she left, he telegraphed his fiancée. The next day, they were married. Despite their keeping the marriage secret, when Blavatsky found out he had dared to marry against her commands, she returned to Boston, where she uttered fierce and even foul maledictions upon the heads of both him and his wife, declared with blasphemous oaths that she would, with the assistance of her spirits, take the life of his wife and cause both him and her to suffer the tortures of the damned. She left soon after. She looked and acted like a demon. He never saw Blavatsky and Olcott again. It seems to me like the masters may have dodged a bullet with Elbridge Brown, because the real third was the man Olcott passed the original note to on its way to HPB at that September 7th meeting, and that was William Quan. Born in Dublin, Ireland, he represented Madame Blavatsky in her divorce of her second marriage in Philadelphia. His younger brother, John Henry Judge, was also involved in HPB, assisting her in preparing Isis Unveiled. And William Quan Judge's wife, Ella, was actively opposed to his engagement in the Theosophical interests. Judge became a naturalized American citizen in April 1872 and was admitted to the State Bar of New York 1 month later. His industry, natural shrewdness, and inflexible persistence commended him to his clients, and he became, as time went on, a specialist in commercial law. From 1879 to 1861, Judge traveled to Venezuela and Mexico on business ventures that were ultimately unsuccessful. He was laden with debt and a damaged law practice. He was exposed to the insect-borne tropical parasite that causes Chagas disease. No treatment was available, and he suffered greatly the effects of this for the rest of his life. In 1886, Judge proposed to Olcott and Blavatsky that an American section should be formed. Their approval, he took on the new role of permanent general secretary. He began publication of a magazine, The Path, and wrote many articles to fill the pages. HPB's admiration of this journal was very marked, and she referred to it as pure booty. The section was greatly invigorated by its first convention, held October 30th, 1886. 5 new lodges were formed in 86, 6 in 1887, 9 in 1888, and another 9 in 1889. So Judge saw over a great expansion of Theosophy in America. In December 1888, Judge was in Dublin, Ireland, and there is evidence that he went from there to assist HPB in the formation of the esoteric section. On December 14th of that year, HPB issued a special order appointing Judge as her only representative for the section of America and the sole channel through whom she will be sent and receive all communications between the members of the section. She did so in virtue of his character as a chela of 13 years standing. Founding of the society, 1875, would have been 13 years prior to that. There are 2 letters have been published in text and replicas that were from Master Moria to Mr. Judge direct. And as with the 1900 letter of Annie Besant, doubt sometimes been cast upon the authenticity of letters received after the death of HPB. That was a significant factor in the crisis that enveloped the society in 1894 and 95, which resulted in the split of the society. There is abundant evidence, aside from the best evidence of all, the fruitfulness of his labors, that he was under the direct guidance of the masters. One adept wrote of him, "When the presence is upon him, he knows well that which others only suspect." It should be noted that even William Quan Judge, himself the driving force and development of the American section of the society, was known to refer to his older friends Blavatsky and Olcott as the founders. So when we hear the term the founders, we could mean Blavatsky and Olcott, we could mean Blavatsky, Olcott, and Judge, or we could mean the original 16 people who signed on at the meeting. That's why that's a little fungible there. In 1878, Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott took the Theosophical Society to Adyar, and the gravity of the Theosophical Society shifted away from its origin, Midtown Manhattan. However, without these original characters on that warm September evening in 1875, there may never have been an Adyar or a Theosophical Society at all. So whether it's to be enraged and then chagrined, like Southern, who was instrumental in sourcing reference material for Isis Unveiled, or an accomplished and then embarrassed occultist like C.C. Massey, lending his credibility to the nascent movement, or a cautious skeptic slowly testing the waters before immersing oneself like Dr. Seth Pancoast, or even Emma Hardinge Britten exposing her own hypocrisy through her curiosity for the truth. Or sometimes you just remain an ass like E. Jerry Brown. It seems like the explorations of Theosophy and the act of putting no religion higher than the truth can be a dicey proposition for a lot of folks. Even for Blavatsky and Olcott, this path was far from smooth. My own theosophical journey has been filled with many of these same sorts of emotions, elation balanced with frustration. One can get discouraged thinking the founders had such clarity of vision, and for us things are so muddled and unclear. good to know that it's always been like this. One takeaway for me has been that although it's hard to see our members come and go as their theosophical activity waxes and wanes, their presence in those essential moments of development, growth, and change can contribute vitally to things far bigger than themselves, even if it is for a short time. This is true for all of us at every moment. And if we show up at just the right moment, people may still be talking about us 150 years later. Please check out our website for more information about our lodge and future programs, our esoteric library, and other information about Theosophy at www.portland.theosophical.org, and find more great public programs like this, if it was great, on our website at TS in Portland on YouTube. Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Any questions?